Welcome to the Leaders Agenda, a podcast series dedicated to reimagining leadership within life sciences. My name is Tarja Huuskonen, and I am your host as well as the CEO of Action for Results. I've had the opportunity to work with leaders all over the world, building new capabilities for innovation. The Leaders Agenda podcast invites insights and perspectives from some of the very best leaders of our time. Wisdom that you too can build into your own leaders' agenda. Hey everyone, today I have a very special panel with me as we are going to talk about outcome-driven innovation and value-driven project management in context of this. This is a topic that is on many of our minds as we do innovation within life sciences, especially where we talk about outcomes from the perspective of the patient, outcomes from the perspective of the healthcare system, and certainly outcomes from the perspective of that immediate customer, whoever that happens to be for us, depending a little bit on what kind of an organization we're part of. But rather than kind of taking it from the scientific side today, we are actually going to talk about it from the perspective of the product development project and what that means for that project leader and the project team, as well as the governance team. How are we going to actually become outcome focused in execution, for instance? So with me today, I have Suzanne Giraud, who is the Vice President of Project Management Office for BD's, Becton & Dickinson's Medication Management Solutions business. And there she's got a multi-billion-dollar product portfolio that includes different kinds of products for dispensing, pharmacy, infusion, and so forth. But she's got an incredible background, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about it. But one thing I just want to say, because this is also an execution conversation, she is a vice president of project management now, but she also spent over 10 years as a core team leader, and that included also diagnostic products. So I think she's got a lot to say in this topic. We also have Mehdi Hirji, who is the vice president of strategy and portfolio management for the clinical diagnostic group at Bio-Rad. Bio-Rad is a diagnostic company that some of you might have heard about, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that company from Mehdi. But like Suzanne, Mehdi has a big portfolio of products, quite diverse products, in fact, under him and within his PMO. But something really interesting also, he also leads the strategic change initiatives for his company, big transformations that some of which may just have to do with outcome-driven innovation. I'm sure we'll find out. One more thing about Mehdi, before going into the portfolio management and strategy and all of that, he was also a vice president of finance. And in fact, he is a certified accountant. So the conversation around value also does sometimes come down to a financial conversation. So I'm very curious about what he's got to say with that. And then finally, Gary Chin, who's the vice president of innovation and product development at Action for Results, a global consulting company, specifically working on the innovation space for life sciences. As a medtech product delivery consultant, he's also a trainer, a coach. He's actually trained thousands of teams as well as individuals on product development. But one of the things that Gary emphasizes a lot is that while capability is on one hand about process, a lot of it is about practice, and practice ultimately has to do with behaviors and culture and all those kinds of things. Something else I want to just kind of mention about Gary is that he has just recently published a blog, which you'll be able to find through the Action for Result LinkedIn, and that happens to be actually talking about value-driven projects and some things that even the ANSI standard, PMBOK, has now kind of upgraded to that. So we'll bring that into the conversation as well. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to have you with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tarja.
Thanks.
And I believe we are all on the West Coast, so we are on the same time zone. I'd like to actually just introduce this conversation of value-driven and outcomes-driven from your perspective. So before we get into any details, could I just hear a little elevator positioning from each one of you? What do we need to do to revolutionize, if you will, how we do projects in life sciences so that we can truly say we are outcome-driven? And who wants to start?
I can
Maybe
start. I don't
go
have a
ahead.
problem starting. Yeah. First of all, thanks again, Tari, for having us on this discussion. I think it's incredibly timely, especially in today's environment, to have this discussion. For me, from a revolutionization perspective, everything starts with the grassroots, right? You can have a strategy and a direction to do something, but if you don't get your organization from the bottoms up to start doing it, it actually doesn't actually come to fruition. And I think from this area right now, we need to get our team members, our core team leaders, our functional managers to start thinking about value creation right early on. And, we use a phase gate process in life sciences to get products through the process. So there's deliverables, there's tasks to be done, but it's less about a checklist and getting those things done and more asking the question continuously, what value are we creating for the end customer and ultimately the patient health? And if we start thinking like that, that mindset will help us drive urgency to deliver, but also with quality and customer experience in mind.
So you putting a plug in for mind shift before anything else.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
we're going to dig deeper into that one. How about you, Suzanne? What would you say?
I mean, I echo a lot of the same sentiments that Mehdi shared. I really think, the core of it is having that growth mindset. So the team members having that growth mindset and owning and believing in what they're doing. That's really where we can create that value. So to me, a lot of, the foundational elements that Mehdi shared, but really having that strategic thinking, the critical thinking, the shared ownership, the shared passion in what they're delivering when it comes to product development. So really growth mindset is really the key thing for me.
All right, very good. How about you, Gary?
Yeah, I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head. I'm going to build on that by maybe taking the consultant view of how do you enable the things that you're all talking about? And if I had to think of one thing that would kind of enable this mind shift, it's related to the organization. So as you know, most medtech organizations are set up as some type of matrix. And in project management terms, they're mostly set up as what we call a weak matrix. So people report into the functions and they're loaned out to the projects. And then the project managers usually have to beg and steal and finagle their way to get resources. And fundamentally, people have alignment and loyalty to the functions versus the projects. I'm not saying this is always the case, but this is the way most companies are organized. If I had to change one thing, I would shift that organization so that the people, the workers are reporting to the projects. So instead of having a weak matrix, we're shifting to a strong matrix, or what we refer to as a projectized organization. In this case, the individuals report to the project manager. The functions are still important and they exist to develop capabilities in support of the projects. So that's a radical shift. But when it happens, the mind shift around value becomes that much tighter because people are all aligned and loyal to the project. They see the value that they can bring and the project can bring versus the value of their function and what their functional manager wants to achieve. So
that is a radical shift, and we'll start unpacking all of these different statements here. I'm loving this. Okay, so for the listeners who are out there, though, we using the word outcome driven. We're using the word value driven. Let's define what we mean with that word first of all. How do we measure, or how do we define what is value driven? And is outcome driven and value driven the same thing from your perspective? I'm just going to put it out there. Give me your definitions and let's see how close we are.
I think that's an interesting question, if it's the same thing. And you would hope they are, but I think it also depends on the perspective. And just to build off what Gary said there, it's the function. The functions, ultimate focus is, for example, manufacturing, to just be able to produce the product, right? If that's the outcome that they're looking for, it may be the right outcome, but is it really creating value for the customer? And what I mean by creating value for the customer is I can produce the product, but can I produce it consistently? Can I count on it to be on the shelf every time? Does it meet the quality standards the customer is looking for? And I think one of the things when we think about value creation, especially in this new technology age, simplicity is a huge customer experience that we often forget. And so when we think about value creation, it's not just getting the product out and being high quality. Is it simple to use? and can I count on it every single time? So I think they're not necessarily the same thing. I would like them eventually one day to be the same, that we're, when we're creating value, it's all outcome focused.
Well, and what you also bringing up is the importance of starting with the customer. So,
Yes.
so do we even understand? And this is maybe a conversation of a different scale, but do we even understand what truly brings value to our customers?
Mm-hmm.
How good are we in that understanding? And do we agree that if we were to understand that part well, would it automatically also translate to value
Yes.
internally? What do you think, Gary
Yeah.
or Suzanne? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it is a mindset shift because, and I read Gary's blog, it's a fantastic blog. And, where we talk about just process and deliverables to what the PMBOK now is sharing around the value and the outcomes. So I think, that mindset shift, and I'll go back to the core team. And, the core team's mindset is really thinking with the end in mind and not just checking the box, going through the phases of the product development process, but more of what the patient and whoever's at the end, right? So our customers that are at the end. So just the value that we're bringing to our patients or clinicians, and really thinking about the motions that they're going through product development along those lines of what are we bringing to our customers, visiting customers. So that it's very easy to get lost in the day-to-day and just start checking boxes. And it really is upon the team, the core team and the entire team to really think, above that and really keep checking in with themselves. What are we doing? Because often we are bound to timelines and we got to get this out fast and, the business deliverables, but then you lose sight of the customer and the value that you're bringing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the question is, would you say, do we do this well? I mean, do we have an example where we actually doing it well?
Good question.
Good question. Yeah. We'll be, and we get asked that question quite a bit, of course, because we always like to do this benchmarking to the companies that do something really well. But honestly, in some ways, I'm not so sure that we can say there's any one company that has totally mastered this to the level that it needs to be. And Gary, since you look across companies, what do you think?
Well, it's a complex situation. So to go back to the original question of outputs versus outcomes versus value, I mean, I back it up. In the worst case, companies are focused on deliverables. Create a report, write a plan, do a review. Okay, those are my deliverables. I like Mehdi's example about manufacturability because that's an outcome. Okay, so we're doing this creating these manufacturing deliverables with the desired outcome of being able to be manufacturable. When I think of value, the difference between outcomes tend to be driven internally, okay, because they come from deliverables. Value in a complex medical product, I see as being able to make the right trade-offs between engineering and chemistry and manufacturing and commercial and quality and regulatory and clinical, so that we are given and taking in all these different areas to optimize what we give to the customer. And that's how we deliver value to the customer, not through any single function, but how we work together in a complex cross-functional environment. So that's my view.
So to be able to do that, I really like this idea of, first of all, you bringing up the idea of how value is really, it's an equation of many different things. It's not any one thing that we can do. And it also is affected by a lot of cross-functional decisions, which is maybe partly why we're thinking of cross-functional teams for innovation. That's one reason. But going back to Mehdi's opening comment around it needs to start with the strategy. Mehdi, do you think that in order to be able to, at the team level, to have the focus that we hear Suzanne and Gary talk about, is the prerequisite to that the company has to ultimately buy into a strategic focus around value and outcome from this perspective? Because I think the traditional way we've been thinking of value is, okay, it's the balance sheet, right? And it's often very short-term focus. It's often driving that milestone focus and the reasons why we can't necessarily take the time to think as broadly as what we've heard here.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Let me, you mentioned balance sheet, and as all of you know, as a finance person, you kind of like to go into that. So when you think of the balance sheet, it is a composition of all your assets, right? But what's the biggest asset, companies have that's not on the balance sheet? It's people. It's the intangible, right? And then when you think about value creation, that's the intangible output of the product that you're actually building. It's that customer experience. You can put revenue numbers and or customer satisfaction on it, but the value creation you get out of that customer loyalty is sometimes very difficult to measure. So what my perspective on this is, it actually goes even higher than strategy. You don't create a strategy to say, I'm going to create value creation. It has to be embedded in the culture. It has to be part of the mission and vision of the organization. And going back to what Gary said earlier, or when you introduced him, it's not necessarily about saying, in your procedures, you're going to create value creation or you're going to be customer centric. It's got to be part of the culture, and those behaviors have to reflect that. So when you go through your deliverables, which are the artifacts of, are you actually creating value? Did you just get a manufacturing plan completed or a design and development plan completed? Or did you actually go through the holistic thinking of how is the customer going to interact with this? And how am I going to improve their experience, their workload, and ultimately the patient's life with what I'm doing? Yeah. So I think it actually transcends a strategy to what is the mission of the organization, and is it embedded in the culture, and then it will come out in how we do the work.
So there is a senior manager role in all of this, however, I would say, right? So we can't just do this at the team level. We need to make sure that it's embedded into everyone's thinking and in the way that we make decisions at all levels.
Yeah,
correct.
Absolutely. And if I may share an example or a perspective, is it's very, very challenging, right? To say that everybody in the organization, embodies those values, right? And when, in my experiences as a core team leader, I had the privilege here, at BD, in certain instances where I was leading very aggressive timelines, trying to meet commitments, to pick the core team. And really, that is what enabled the success, is being able to pick that core team. And there, I looked for those individuals that embodied exactly what you're saying, Mehdi, right? That those values, they believe in the organization, they have that passion. And when you have that, that's when the magic happens. Yeah.
So how did you manage to be able to get to that point where you got to pick your own team? Because I know we're almost fighting for the resources a lot of times, right?
Yeah, I mean, often in the situations that I've been pulled in, it was the building's on fire. Okay,
everything's on fire.
Yeah,
we need help. And so, but to me, it all starts with the team. And so I would raise my hand. Yeah, happy to help, but let me pick the team. And often those team members, they want to help. They want to make sure that we at the end are delivering what we want to deliver, and they're driven and motivated by that. So I recognize, Tarja, that it's not, everybody can't just go handpick their team, but I do think, and it kind of builds on the point that you were making before, Gary, around, having those team members report into the PM. We should be able to interview, in a sense, right, and pick those team members rather than having it delegated to you.
Right. And, your project is probably a good case study, Suzanne, because almost any company, like when they get their back against the wall and everything's on fire, they can put together the Tiger team. They pick the best, they picked you pick your team, you can get it done. The question really is, for big organizations that you both manage, is how do you spread the peanut butter across the project so that all teams can deliver? And I like what Mehdi said about people as the most important asset, right? So if we look at it that way, my feeling is that most people, you may think they're not part of the top tier, but they all have the capability to be there. We just need to remove the roadblocks and enable them to reach their potential. And I think part of that is the organization and the amount of control that we try to put on projects.
Mhm.
Okay. Some of you, both of you may be exploring the move to agile, right? So the move, as companies move from this kind of predictive project management, traditional waterfall environment to more of an agile environment, they're going to, by definition, have to let go of control and start trusting the teams to make decisions. So functional managers can't make all the decisions. Senior managers can't make the decisions. Have to be rapid. We have to be agile, right?
Right.
So anyone who's thinking of going in that direction, which is almost all of our clients at some level,
Yeah.
they need to start by taking a few steps in this direction that both of you are talking about building capability in the teams, coaching them, letting them fail and learn from the failures and all of those things, because that's really how we help them create value. And, I'll go back to what I said before about value creation being a cross-functional view. And, back when I was at a startup, there's 10 of us, we're sitting around a table. We all have different roles, but we're all doing everyone's role because it's like a hive mind. Every decision that someone makes, I know how it affects something else. In our big organizations now, especially when you're aligned with your function, you're really always thinking about what does that mean to my function? You're not really thinking. We can tell them, think about external value to the customer, but really they're thinking about what is my boss going to say in the function. And, so how do we move from that model?
And the metrics often actually are especially reinforcing that mindset, right? So
Yeah.
let's go back to then. So the current world, for the most part, is going to be one where those cross-functional teams, I think, are pretty well established almost across all of life sciences companies by now. Some of them do it a little better than others, but we've all recognized that, okay, it takes that cross-functional team to get a product out the door. Now, this idea of actually having that team more aligned with the project than maybe the function. That's an interesting idea for a couple of reasons. In the pharma side, I think we were actually a little bit faster getting to PMO implementation, for instance. So for the longest time, pharma did not actually put a lot of investment into project management. It was not considered a core competency. And then 10, 15 years ago, they really woke up to the fact that, oh my gosh, I mean, look at all these humongous product development efforts that go to like 12 years and lots of money goes into it, and we don't have the discipline. So PMOs really became a big thing. And in fact, they did a lot of certification of their project managers. MedTech, interestingly enough, is a little bit behind that wave. But one of the things that is always happening when a project management office is put in place, it becomes a big conversation. And let me just, some of the conversations I've heard is, okay, where should this project management office be reporting? Should it report directly to the business or to the CEO or whatever level we are in, or should it be in R&D? Should it be more of a functionally driven? Then the second thing is, who should be in the PMO? And do we, what kinds of people should we be hiring over there? And then if we have this cross-functional team, what's the leader's authority in relation to that cross-functional team? And then how do we measure? So the PMO conversation is all over the place. We have two people here who own PMOs. Do we have a magic formula here? What would you say? Where are we in the life of PMOs, and where do you think we got to be headed?
I think it's a reflection of where the organization is around its maturity and thinking about what is program and project management. In organizations where it's reporting into a particular function, for example, R&D, I think what it's a reflection of is they see PMO as technical executors. And, it starts with product development and it ends with a product release. But where you're starting to see PMO really transcend is an end-to-end process from concept all the way to commercialization and beyond commercialization to post-market support, and making sure that life cycle of that product end to end is managed and maintained. So when you launch a product, you may not have actual project management activities to do, but making sure that it fits directly into the operations of the organization and is a well-oiled machine is really where the industry is really headed towards, right? It's not just about putting the product out, but maintaining the product, having the life cycle around it, and eventually obsoleting it and coming up with the next generation project. So I think it shows kind of the maturity. At Bio-Rad, we have gone through the maturity. It started off as someone needed a project manager to, okay, let's set up a PMO in a division. Let's have a report to R&D. And now it's a very strategic concept. And, if you read about, what the PMI has done in terms of doing investigation and research, a lot of companies beyond life sciences are opening up PMOs because 80% of the work companies do beyond their daily operations is projects.
Yes.
And so you have to look at it as a strategic enabler, whatever you're doing, whether it's facilities projects, IT projects, product development, it is a strategic enabler.
And would you say it belongs reporting to where?
I believe it should report at the highest level. So in our organization, it reports directly into the group president.
Okay, very good.
And so I agree that it should report into the group president, but in our organization, it reports into the VP of R&D. So all of the PMO offices are reporting into R&D. And there is this, I believe that they are almost mini GMs. So I look at our core team leaders and leaders within the PMO as these mini GMs. And there is this thought and education within the organization. And I do think it's a byproduct of where we sit, that we're just, technical, and we're going to just, check boxes and schedule meetings and, just like your traditional PM, rather than looking at these as cross-functional leaders and these mini GMs within the organization. So I do believe that, there is an opportunity to evolve and report into the highest level of the organization. So Matthew, I agree with everything that you're saying there. We report into R&D, Tarja, but I think we have to report into the president.
What
I
do
think
you
one of the
Gary, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the kind of the changes that's happening now is, and just to build off what Suzanne said there, is project management has been often considered the process owner, right? How do we do product development? And often they spend a lot of time teaching the core team, this is the next step. And, the idea of a core team leader is to set a roadmap and make sure that we can get from point A to point B. But as we get core teams to be more effective, empowered, we shouldn't need to teach them the process. They should understand the process because of some foundational learnings. And the core team leader then becomes a value delivery leader, right? Mm-hmm. How do you get from point A to point B, but doing it in a way that actually delivers what the business case needs, right? The financial needs of the company, but for the customer right at the end of it. So I think that's where we're kind of transcending is, task, deliverables, process. And that's exactly what, Gary articulated in his blog, which I also loved reading, is that movement into that new direction of value delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let me try to put both of your comments in context because I like them. I agree with them. Okay, so, just a little history. I think, back in the day, right, we used to think of, R&D creates products, manufacturing builds them, marketing figures out how to sell them, very generically. So it made sense. Who's creating the products? R&D, project management, PMO belongs there, right? As we have evolved, matured, to use your term, Mehdi, we've learned that value is created cross-functionally, right? So in that argument for mature product lines, I do believe that it makes sense to have the PMO report into the highest level so that they're not beholden to R&D. Despite whatever the R&D people say, there's always some undertones, right? Now, however, for organizations that are still truly delivering value through technical and scientific innovation, I think there's still an argument for running the projects out of R&D because that's 90% of where we're delivering value. For mature product lines, value creation from technology is a table stake. We need to learn how to deliver value through service, through distribution, through commercial partnerships in other ways, right? So that's how we're going to compete in the marketplace. In those instances, I agree that having the PMO have more of a cross-functional view makes sense.
Yeah.
But what you all are saying is that one thing that has already changed from the sounds of it is how we think of that project manager's role. You are using words project leader, core team leader, and Suzanne, you talked about leadership specifically being a critical contributor to success. So who are we really looking for when we're hiring? We had a quick comment on who should we hire earlier, and how do you get to that A team so that it doesn't have to be a crisis, but that we have actually, I like to think about it as how do we build the right talent at scale, so to speak, which means we have to rethink our hiring strategies. We need to also think about how do we develop people cross-functionally in a different way for the core teams. But let's start with that core team leader, as I hear you guys call the role. How is a core team leader different from a project manager for anyone out there who's still trying to figure that out?
Did you want to go, Matthew?
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Oh, okay. From my perspective, the difference is I look at it as a core team leader more as a cross-functional, almost like a business leader, this mini GM. They have a platform, a product, part of the portfolio that they are leading. And where the traditional project manager, and I'll say even the perception that we're trying to change, is that they're just a coordinator. They're there to schedule a meeting and just pull a team, a cross-functional team together. And it is above that. It is above that. And we really, and I really want for core team leaders to feel that, once they are in that role, that they can move towards a GM, VP GM route or platform leader route role within the organization. So I see, differences, and I'll say that, my expectations when I'm hiring these core team leaders is that they have those leadership capabilities, the interpersonal skills, the emotional intelligence. These are foundational to success in the role. Yes, there are the tactical, the tools, the mechanisms that are needed, and understanding of the product development process. But I remember when I was in grad school and I was getting my master's in project management, that one of our professors said, the core team leader, or that project manager, they're the conductor of the orchestra. Their job isn't to be playing the flute, the bass, strings. Their job is to create that symphony. And so it's those key characteristics of just that leadership, the interpersonal, the emotional intelligence.
So Suzanne, just a quick question. I love that model, okay?
Yeah.
Would you agree that the conductor, the core team leader, needs a coordinator, a project manager to run the details of the project? Or do you expect the core team leader to run the details?
I think it depends on how big the program is. So I've seen both, Gary, but I do, we have a lot of complexity within our organization. So we do have coordinators, analysts, others supporting that leader to help drive those deliverables.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I like that model.
Yeah,
I love that example that you said, Suzanne, on the symphony and the coordinate and the orchestra. I think just to build off of that question that Gary asked, I think it definitely depends on the complexity, the different work packages that are there. But when we think about the traditional project manager role, it's that triangle: scope, timeline, and cost, right? That's what they focus on. And when you have a really good project manager, they can take care of that. The core team leader transcends beyond that, so they need to have that practical triangle in place, but they need to have those interpersonal skills, the influencing skills. And, as the new PMBOK has identified those 12 principles, the one that really resonates with me is stewardship. Yes. Stewardship to the company, stewardship to the project, stewardship to the customer.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, there's the, behavioral things that you're talking about, soft skills, leadership, influencing, all that, very important. But what I also see is core team leaders have to have a pretty good understanding of the core technical elements. So, engineering, science, quality system, regulations, medical, commercial, manufacturing, all, not that they have to be an expert, okay, in all this, because that's ridiculous, but they need to understand how they tie together, because it's all about connections, right? And when you're in a meeting and someone from manufacturing says something, your antenna should go up and say, hey, the commercial that's going to mess up commercial or clinical or something like that. So we need people who have a very broad breadth of knowledge of how medical products come to be, because the environment with the healthcare system, the regulations, everything, it's just getting more and more complex.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's also very important here is that you can't, you're talking about a leadership element in this context also that has to do with the core team itself, right? Now, but also beyond the core team, needing to really do that amongst stakeholders in all levels of the organization, sometimes directly also with customers and partners and all of that. So there's a credibility issue that also comes along that, am I going to be listened to? And we all know, we can have big egos because we have our science backgrounds and this background and that background. And so if someone comes in, we do look for credibility, and everybody has sort of their own notion as to what that looks like. What I find interesting is if you look at Europe, and of course I'm from there, so I'm always interested in seeing what's different in Europe than here. European model of program management and project management, particularly in life sciences, was for the longest time very different from the United States. They emphasized in their hiring, they wanted to make sure that we had usually a scientific degree or an engineering degree, something that was relevant for the type of projects or programs that organization was involved with. Whereas here in the United States, for the longest time, the biggest thing was, do you have a program project management certification, or perhaps it's part of your university education. MBA, exactly. So have we now kind of pulled that closer, where we looking for people who bring in a mix of that? So that person who wants to actually get the job, what should they be having in that resume so that they can even be interviewed?
Yeah, for me, I don't so much weigh on the technical aspect of it, more on the experiences, obviously the understanding of the product development process, working in the med device life sciences space, those experiences. But to me, it's more the behaviors of the individual that I would weigh more than they have a technical degree. Because if they have that right growth mindset and the asking of questions, and, to the point that you made earlier, Gary, around, if someone says something about manufacturing and your antennas, just that curiosity and the asking of the questions and the learning and digging. So from my perspective, I would weigh more on the experiences and just the how and the behaviors and the emotional intelligence than the technical.
I tend to agree with Suzanne. I have a slightly a different perspective on that. When I look at, and unfortunately, I don't hit the technical aspect and I don't hit the PMP aspect myself. I completely come from finance, so I'm a little bit different anomaly there. So you wonder how I got the job, but when I'm looking for that hire, I am looking for a technical foundation. And that technical foundation could be engineering, science, could be finance, but do you have the capacity to do critical thinking?
Yes.
Do you have the capacity to go through a process and say, I have this problem and how do I solve it, right? So problem solving technicalities. So that's one aspect I'm looking for. Obviously, being able to manage a set of deliverables, go from point A to point B, is also another piece. So I don't necessarily want to call that project management, because there may be some people that come from a function where they didn't consider themselves a project manager, but they were doing project management, right? So that's the second piece I look for. And third, just like Suzanne said, is, how can they deliver? Do they know how to deal with people? Do they have that project and leadership effectiveness? Can they see the bigger picture? Can they bring people together and facilitate a discussion to get from one point to another? So I think that last piece is the real kind of secret sauce of finding the right core team leader. The first two are just kind of like, Do you even know what you're doing? Okay, yes, you know what you're doing. Can you do it effectively?
Well, I don't know about that. First, when I would say critical thinking, I mean, I have to, because critical thinking happens to be one of those things that I deal with quite a bit in some of my teachings and conversations and presentations, and I feel that we have actually a void of critical thinking in a lot of organizations these days. And it's not that we don't have the ability to do critical thinking, but number one, we don't necessarily encourage it in the current mode of operation. And since we are talking about projects, let me just put it into projects. If we are totally milestone driven and we go from one meeting to another, which by the way seems to be the mode of operation, and people are really spread out thin, when are we going to do critical thinking? You don't do critical thinking in 30 seconds or less. You have to do critical thinking with some reflection, right? And actually, critical thinking in a team is incredible when it happens. I would say that that is the secret sauce for the innovation part, through the innovation thinking as well. And so I guess the question there is, can we bring critical thinking back to the way we work? Can we find time and space? And first of all, I mean, if you agree that is an important part of how we can deliver value, can we find the time and space to do the right things, to really allow the teams to think about the best ways forward in a different way?
So I think I'm sorry, go ahead, Suzanne.
Okay. I was just going to say, I absolutely think that critical thinking is key. Tarja, you hit the nail on the head there. And can we bring that back? To your point, we are going at lightning speed. I think, this is just the landscape that we're in, where it's just constant, delivery. And so it really has to start with taking a step back, and as we're mapping out our portfolio, almost embedding that time to allow for that innovation. So I think we really have to be, almost like diligent and prescriptive on building that time in, because you're right. It is, I mean, I see it. It's almost mechanical. After a point, it's just like the teams are just going through the motions.
It's a list of deliverables. Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes that because of the speed and just expectations, and we got to deliver. And so I do think that we absolutely have to take it back if we want to be innovative. We really
and
do.
you're saying we really have to consciously,
yes,
maybe find those places where we build it into the work practice.
Yes.
So would you say that it's particularly important then in the front end, because that's where we also thinking about the strategy forward, and a lot of trade-offs and all of that. We're not yet in the execution mode, but so I would say that's definitely
that's where you start, right, in the definition of the portfolio strategy or the strategy. And go ahead, Matthew.
No, you said it really well. I was just going to add that, just to elaborate on, in the front end, when we're thinking about it, it really needs to happen in the planning section, right? And that's where most companies just want to go fast, right? They just want to, they want to kick it off. They want to start spending money. They want to show progress. And planning is where you're really doing the critical thinking. What could go wrong? What do we need it to be? How long is this going to take? And if you don't do that well, then you're in this doom loop of you're just trying to execute. You're trying to keep up with the next milestone. I also think, kind of going back to the question, the answer is absolutely yes. But I think that's where leadership, if they value that characteristic, if they value that behavior, needs to set up the portfolio for that success. And there's a couple ways that companies are overlooking and doing that. Number one is, are you matching your portfolio to the resources you have available, or are you jamming it in? And when you jam it in, you lose quality, and critical thinking is the first thing to go, right? It's the next action to be done. Number two, are you spreading teams too thin by having them do multiple projects or multiple types of projects? Often, the people that need to do the critical thinking are also doing the frontline firefighting, right? So that's the easier thing to do. When we ever having a discussion in our organization, we need to do more strategic thinking. Well, you can't put 4 hours on your calendar and say, I'm going to do strategic thinking right now. Right? It doesn't work like that, right? And when you get to that 4-hour time slot, you really don't want to do it because there's emails and burning things that are coming up. So you need to create a culture and a division in work where these folks really have to spend time in evaluating options, bringing proposals to the organization, and that letting that critical thinking gear really spin at that time.
Yeah, happening organically within the organization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add one thing to your list, your hiring skill list that both of you threw out there, is that, core team leaders, they need to be good integrators, right? They need to be able to connect the dots between the organization and the project and the situation that they're at. Because when you can immediately connect the dots, you can prompt the critical thinking or the discussion on the spot. Now, Tadia started the discussion with, do we need extra time? You, Suzanne, said, well, we're always running 1,000,000 miles an hour, right? So to some extent, we need to be able to identify the topics that need to be thought about on the spot as they go up, keep track of them from a project management perspective, and to Mehdi's point, plan appropriately. And here's an example, and I've seen this several times. It's like, so you have a deliverable front end. So we're talking about the front end. So you're working on your target product profile, right? Someone in commercial, it's on the schedule. Commercial is going to deliver it 2 weeks from Tuesday, right? And so to them, it's a template, and you're going to get it in 2 weeks. But when we're facilitating the discussion of a target product profile, it's like 4, 6, 8 weeks of 2 meetings a week where we talk about something, we bring up topics, people have to go away and think about them, we come back, we churn on it, we go away again. So, and that goes into the plan, Mehdi. So to your point, right, when we're planning our things, we need to plan in a way. This is carving out time to think, to Tadia's point. So instead of just thinking about deliverables, let's think about what is the process to cross-functionally develop the right thought process in critical thinking. And when you flesh out the schedule, suddenly it gets really long, because now it takes 6 weeks to do something that previously only took 2. But the value that you're getting is so much more. Okay. And really things start to condense over time.
Totally.
And things start to condense partly because what you're also doing is you're driving cross-functional agreement beyond the team even, because by those core team members, and since you are using target product profile, that's the tool that we use quite often in most life sciences companies now to really hone in on what the value drivers need to be. Going back to the value-driven approach, what the value drivers need to be for that product to succeed when it's out in the market. So this is, and then also, what are some of the internal value drivers? This is not an inconsequential conversation. This is like the conversation that results in either the right product or the wrong product.
Right.
And imagine if it's the wrong product, and the next 6, 7, 8 years, however long your products take to get out there, we're putting a lot of money, a lot of effort into it. If we never realized that it was the wrong product to start with, that money does not give us a return on investment, even if we think in those traditional, very financial terms, let alone value that's driven otherwise for the customer or the patient. So there are deliverables, sounds like, that really require an added amount of thought process. And that becomes the facilitative part that we want our core team leaders also to really hone in and be very good at, bringing in also the ability to disagree vehemently before we agree, so that when we get to that agreement, we all feel good. This is the right product in this case. What do you think?
Yeah, it's right. We kind of villainizing deliverables, but the fact is we need deliverables, okay? But the end product is not the deliverable. It's like, what did we learn from the process of creating the deliverables? And assuming it's a cross-functional process and we had disagreements, to Tadia's point, those are the things that we're learning, and they subtly shift the project in one direction or another.
Yeah. And I'll give an example to your point, Taria, too, around the facilitation, bringing that cross-functional team together. So in one of the initiatives that I was asked to lead, I had to double the output of the team. So we had to, double the output of the antibody reagent development. And one of the first things that I did, I had just inherited the team, is just a process mapping session. This is the current state, and now we're going to move to the future state. What does that look like? And change is hard. So there, a lot of people were kicking and screaming and, this is great, like what we're doing. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying it's not, but like, it's just this mindset, this growth mindset, the thinking of continuous improvement. And we mapped out this future state with the thinking, as a team, like we really want to, increase the output, and we were able to do it. But a lot of it was also just managing the team members ahead of the meeting, in the meeting. And then you could see how it was almost like a team building exercise by the end of it, right? We just, as a team, developed this new process and were able to successfully achieve the goals of the business. And
what you're bringing up is extremely important. And actually, I was reading Gary's blog as well, just to be up on PMBOK. They are now saying change management is recognized as something really critical, right? Which you speak into that as well, which to me is your approach is so beautiful, because you're actually giving an example what it takes to do change management well. It's not enough just to have a PowerPoint that says we believe in outcome driven, whatever, right? We've got to take it down to the next level. Everybody's going to nod, yeah, we believe in outcome driven and value. Who's going to say no, we don't, right? But what does it really mean? It means I'm doing something differently for it within my job. And until it gets translated to what I need to do differently, it's not going to happen. And by the way, in that translation, what you also said was some people were having all kinds of different emotional reactions to it, because that kicking and screaming part is also, well, wait a minute. You telling me I have to change the way I do work? What does it mean? Can I still be successful? Do I have the right? All those things play out in our microcosm, smaller teams, as well as at the enterprise level, when we are trying to do the big transformation that Mehdi's all about in some of his programs.
Right.
Tari, if I can add to the point of critical thinking, I think one of the things that we need to ensure that there is a culture to do the pressure testing. Critical thinking is not just the function coming and say, we've thought about this and said, here it is, but really the team challenging the assumptions, challenging the thought process. That's where the value of critical thinking and cross-functional critical thinking comes up. And in some cultures, it's difficult to do that because, you look at the function as the expert, and it's like, well, if R&D says we're going to do it this way, no one should ask them, to come up with a different way. Or if manufacturing said we're going to build it into this plant, don't ask them how they came up with that. And I think that's where the culture has to enable that we should have, safe spaces to be able to have those conversations. It should not be taken personally. It's about seeking to understand and uncovering things that may have been either overly assumed or misunderstood. And that is really an element of critical thinking that often, it's like, well, yes, we did critical thinking, again, a checkbox, but it's really that process.
Well, Mehdi, I'll go back to the PMBOK blog since I wrote it. I'm forgetting, but you're reminding me. Another key area that PMI is talking about, and I know both of you have probably already been doing this to some extent, but the whole idea of tailoring, right, which is challenging the process. So we have this process. If it doesn't make sense for your situation and your project and your product, don't do it. But believe me, I see teams just blindly doing stuff, and you ask them and they say, I don't know why we're doing this, Gary, but the process says we need to do this, so we're doing it. I mean, it's crazy, right? So as executives, we need to kind of encourage people to to challenge it and don't do things that don't make sense.
Wouldn't it be interesting to see? But wouldn't it be interesting to do the study to actually say, how much time would we save if we didn't do the things we don't know why we're doing them? I mean, this is like we could do a whole value mapping on just those occasions. And that goes not just to those project management activities. I mean, design control is another one where I think we get so scared. We are in this regulated environment, right? And people are in different levels of maturity sometimes on how long they've been there, how much experience, and then the procedure comes. And the procedure must be going down to work instruction level. And the work instruction pretty much tells me that I must move this piece of paper over here. Therefore, I will, even though it's got nothing to do with what I'm doing. So we don't know how to tailor. So number one, what I'm hearing is we need permission almost to be able to think differently and act differently. So we need permission to question the status quo, so to speak, whether that's a process or policy or just, a functional mindset, whatever it is. We need almost permission. So we hereby can give that permission, but how do we do that in the organization?
Well, I would give them the mindset, right? So
Yes.
everyone's talking about mindset. And the agile lean mindset is maximize the amount of work not done. Guess what work we're not going to do? The work that's non-value added. So almost let's go through our process, our phase gate process, our design controls, whatever it is, project management. If it's not adding value, let's not do it.
Right.
There's a revolutionary context for the next day. Who owns success in a value-driven world? How do we measure success of, let's just talk about new product development projects for a while.
Well, there were two questions there.
Yeah.
Yes. Who owns it and how we measure. So you can do them together or separately, in whichever order you would like.
I would say from ownership standpoint, again, if we have a truly empowered team, core team, and they're able to operate, fluidly from cross-functional, they're the ones that own success. They should define what success looks like and drive towards it. That I would say is the ideal situation. What we see more often is, again, I hate to harp on the same topic, is, if they're task oriented, they're going to say success looks like I got through the phase gates, I got this out the door, and now it's not my problem if it doesn't sell, right? I was having a conversation with a colleague who came from a different company, and the way they measured success, or the way they rewarded success, was launching the product gets you 10% of your bonus. You get the 90% a year later when you meet your success metrics, which is the revenue, the number of complaints or defects that the customer complained about. And, you set those during planning that I'm expecting, so many complaints or issues with this product. And you go in there with eyes wide open that this is acceptable or not acceptable, and what you see in a year. Now, I'd say that's a very mature model. Most companies have a tough time giving rewards over beyond 1 year. But I think, if you really are going to put success in the hands of the team, you need to let them own it and reward them accordingly for that.
And you need to really think about what you are rewarding, which I love your example there, being a very different kind, because I think time to market is the big metric in the industry. I feel that metric is partly what gets us in trouble, because even we benchmark organizations against time to market. What about time to value?
Right.
And what you are really discussing is time to value, Mehdi, in your example there.
Exactly. And I would, being a finance guy, time to value goes along with, total cost of ownership. Is I can extract the value, but over a 5-year, 10-year period, if my product is going to fail incredibly in the market and I have to do all this rework or servicing that product, and I could have done it during the design phase because I just wanted to get it out fast. I think this is where we are challenged with agile principles, a minimal viable product, and the customer experience. It's not that they can't work together. It's often that we lean one way or another on this, and we just don't hit that balance correctly.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
So going back, who owns success?
I would say, similar to what Matthew said, it is the team. Going back to the example that I gave where we mapped out the current state, the future state, I remember in those sessions we're all tied to each other's successes. None of us are successful alone. If any one of us fail, we fail as a team. If we're successful, we're successful as a team. And so I really do believe that, the sense of empowering the team, giving them the autonomy, helping them remove roadblocks, at the leadership level, it really is, the team that owns it. And I think that's where you do get the value. In terms of in terms of measuring success, I would agree. I like the model that Matthew shared, where you're tied to after the product is market, because you're right, Tarja, we're often tied to the goals of time to market. And we hit a planning phase exit. We, hit our, qualification phase exit. We met this criteria. So this is, just this continuous evolution that we need within our organization to really tie it to the value of our customer and how it does in the market.
So I'm curious, though, in this context of, okay, the team owns it. Well, what does management own then? What
Yeah,
does
well,
the senior leadership own, and what does the middle management? Where's management in the equation of value conversation? Carrie, what were you going to say?
yeah. Well, no, and I was thinking along those exact lines. So Mehdi started his example with, in the ideal case, there's the fully empowered team. Okay, I agree with everybody. The reality is most teams are not fully empowered. Okay, there's functional managers parachuting into team meetings, making decisions that are aligned with their function, then leaving, and there's senior managers setting unrealistic targets and saying must do this, very timeline driven and all of that. So simplistically, the way I look at it is, if you're making the decisions, you're accountable. Okay. And so I would push accountability to the functional managers. And if the governance body and the senior management team is involved in making project decisions, to them. And I think they're, in a way, taking themselves off the hook. They're putting the onus on project teams, but not empowering them. So they're asking them to take accountability for success, but they're not giving them the tools to actually do it.
I think that's true. I think that happens in certain teams, probably more often than not, than both Susanna and I would be willing to share. But you're absolutely right. But again, trying to paint the picture of where we should be. Management has accountability, has responsibility, but their main responsibility is to enable and remove obstacles.
Exactly.
And if they are doing that, the team is going to have the capability to define that success and reach that success. I think what becomes very challenging in a matrix organization and a large organization is you have different perspectives on how to do this, and that alignment is so important. So I think the kind of the where we end up landing is everyone owns that success. It's just, are we shifting it from one party to another, or are we really honing down on who really should own it?
Well, and what part of that success do they own? I think that needs to be really defined, because when you talk about accountability, when everyone's accountable, no one is accountable, right?
Exactly.
So there's we still have to dissect accountability, ownership, all of that down to real people with names and understand which part is owned where. And I think it's interesting when you say, okay, well, management needs to provide the support. One way by which, okay, so let me just take one example here, since we started with the resource conversation. I'll bring us back to the resource conversation, because I'm yet to find a project team that doesn't feel that resources are an issue, right? So we have now these governance teams that are part of the whole system and the structure. Sometimes we call them portfolio teams, and other times we call them other things, pipeline teams, whatever they are called in your organization. But that's the senior team making governance decisions. In a gate process, they would be making gate decisions. And what we say usually is that we have to be, that's where we make a commitment around resources. Well, that commitment is at a very high level on resources. The actual resources materialize in every single function, and that translation process is not always working very well. But and we won't go into that one today, because that's a whole other topic. But the piece that I don't see enough is, we talk about portfolio teams, but portfolio management still in very many companies is kind of a once a year thing, potentially a quarterly review. It is not the trade-off thing that Carrie was talking about earlier. So, I'm planning my project. These things are happening. Now we got new risks coming in. I need to be able to actually put resources to address those risks. Planning doesn't happen once a year. It's an ongoing thing. We have the plan, but we also need to be managing all the different things that are happening. That means that trade-offs are going to be coming up all the time. So I'm wondering, in this value conversations, if we can get the teams to really manage value at the team level, then do we by definition raise the demand for that senior managers to really look at value differently at the portfolio level and become the masters of moving resources in a much more agile way? What do you think?
Absolutely. I can, a NPD, a new product development portfolio, to like any investment portfolio. You don't want to do day trading, right? You don't want to be moving things around on a daily basis, but you also don't want to do buy and hold and look at your portfolio every 3 to 5 years and see, did I do well? It needs to be active management. And what that balance looks like is, are you looking at it on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis? that's up to the organization and their complexity. But truly, if we can get to that point where, we have the critical thinking, we have the empowerment, the teams can do self, governance there because they know what they need to do to move to the next gate along with the functional managers. And then the portfolio team then is looking more from an exception base and total risk of the portfolio and balancing the portfolio and making sure that we're investing in the right pillars to meet the strategy the company has set out to do. And being less more of a, are you being compliant to your stage gate process, which,
Yes.
That governance seems to be about that, right? Are you being compliant, and move governance towards, really optimizing the portfolio for the best results?
Yeah, on that, I love the investment approach, Maddie.
Yeah.
I usually use the venture capital model, but so there's the pipeline management, I think, of shifting resources to optimize movement of approved projects through the pipeline. I'd like to add to that the whole idea of project selection and funding and killing. Okay, so a lot of times we get into this habit of, once we decide we have a project, it's going to go through all the phases, come hell or high water, right? But what I think will drive innovation, so switching from product development to innovation, let's start dozens of projects in the concept phase and move them through, give them just a little bit of funding, see how they move forward, stop the ones that aren't delivering value, move the pieces through to the next phase that are delivering value. And they don't have to be all new products. Companies do this with just looking at features and components and add-ons. So they're looking at it from a product, from a portfolio perspective, and only moving the elements of high value forward. So in this I see as a role of the governance, to go back to your point, Tadia, of the governance body and portfolio management. So how do we select, fund, and move things through? And Mehdi, the venture capitalists don't fork over $20 million on day one and say, hey, go at it, right? You're limited by funding on what you can do, and the team has to deliver within that funding or it's over.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that was the original purpose of the phase gate process. It was supposed to be a funnel. It became a tunnel in many cases, right? But it was supposed to do that, right? Right.
Yeah, that's an opportunity.
There's an opportunity. We've got lots of opportunities.
Yes.
And we could probably talk about many of them for a very long time, but we're going to have to start wrapping up over here. So let's kind of help me summarize now where we've started. We've started, first of all, in a very strong statement by each of you in one way or another, saying it's got to start with the mindset. If we want to become value driven and really get good at that, mind shift is where we have to start. And we discussed different ways by which we can actually make that happen, including rethinking how we hire, how we develop folks, and then how we engage them in different ways, whether that's at the team level or otherwise. And we went a little bit into the opportunities that exist if we learn to do this well, and what that can actually do to change the way we not just do projects, but govern them. And this last conversation is fascinating because I think that we now getting to that place where we could actually look at some very interesting new sustainable ways to become far more competitive as companies. So I would almost suggest that this is worth everyone's while within their own organization to really put some thought to this at the team level, at the governance level. What does it look like for them? Because this is where that competitive tool is going to be residing. And we can't get there without mapping it. It doesn't just automatically happen. So with that in mind, I want to ask you to end with a little bit of advice. If we have a project core team leader listening and you want to give them some advice based on this conversation, what would be the one piece of advice you would give them? And the same if you have a senior functional leader, and you can tell me how you want to define that role if you have the need to do so. So we want two pieces of advice, one from a functional side, one from the project side, that helps that person who wants to take the journey, take the next step.
I could start. I think in both cases, and I'll start with the core team leader first. We talked about a lot of, like you said, mindset shift. Ideally, what should happen, where the industry is trending towards, how the competitive advantage is going to be, we'll get there. There's two forces. There's how we actually do the work and the culture that we're trying to adopt. And it was mentioned earlier that the PMBOK has recognized the value of change management. And I think that's where core team leaders need to spend a little bit more time, is understanding the methodology to do change management. It's not about just saying, we're going to do this, we put on a slide, we're going to think like this now, we're going to act like this now, but really a deliberate effort to do change management. Our organization has invested in this area, and we're using a model called ADKAR. And those letters stand for, awareness, desire to change, knowledge to change, ability to change, and reinforcing that change, right? It's a model there. And like you said, you got to map out this change in order for it to happen. And so I think one of the things that core team leaders, my advice to them is, everything that Gary wrote in his blog, I think is absolutely applicable. And I could not agree with it more. But really, to emphasize, in order to get there, you need that vehicle of change management. And so they should not underestimate the need to invest in this area in order to get the results that we want.
Very good. So shall we do the round of core team
And then
first? We'll come back to functional leader for you.
Yeah, I agree with everything Mehdi said. I would say, if there is a core team leader, one piece of advice is to really to have that growth mindset, because, as an example, product development teams will always face challenges. So instead of being stuck by that, like thinking of creative ways of how are we going to get through that. So, but it's not them alone that needs that mindset, it's the team. And so it really is making sure that they have the right people on the bus to help them successfully navigate through product development. So I would say, that one piece of advice is just that growth mindset and making sure that they have the right team members to help them drive to success.
Suzanne, you used the word growth mindset quite a bit, and I just realized that we haven't actually defined it for folks who may not be familiar with
so that fixed
the idea of growth mindset. So can you just take a few seconds and
okay.
explain what is meant by it? Yes.
Yeah, so there's fixed versus growth, and really, at BD, they are making a concerted effort to just, teach us to have this growth mindset. So, as an example that like I gave, in a fixed mindset, you come to a challenge and it's a wall, right? You're just like, okay, what, you just stop. In a growth mindset, you come to a challenge and, as a team, you think, okay, how do we get through this? How do we evolve through this? It's just, having that shift of, you're not blocked by it, but, to leverage the team to get through and work through challenges, as an example.
And I love that. And I think on a personal level, what it also means very much is, if I have a fixed mindset, I have to kind of be perfect in every way.
Right.
When I have a growth mindset, it's okay for me to say, hey, I really don't know.
Exactly.
And I can suddenly become curious, and I can stumble, right, and I can keep learning.
It's okay.
And that's the big difference, right? So, so again, going back to that hiring mode, what are we looking for in the growth mindset? It's that type of a.
That's exactly right, Tara.
Perfect. All right, so core team leader, we are still on that round, Gary.
Okay, I'll give a simpler piece of advice. If you agree with the premise that value is created cross-functionally, okay, the integration of cross-functional thought, observe your meetings, okay, and what does the conversation look like? Is it R&D lead doing all the talking and everyone else nodding their head? Or is it a debate and a discussion and people challenging each other? Because that's really what you want. So if you do observe a few people dominating your meetings and most of the people sitting silent, I would do what you can to facilitate a better cross-functional discussion. Help the people who are naturally quiet find their voice. Because I think once people find their voice and they get their footing in the team, then it becomes easier for them to talk up and get into the conversation. Some of us we're thinking so much that by the time you think of what you want to say, the conversation has moved on, right? So look for those types of things and just help your team have a better conversation.
I like
Excellent.
that.
I
For
love
the
that.
next team meeting, keep that in mind. Now we are in functional leader. This is a senior functional leader listening. What would you like to say to them? We'll start with you, Mehdi, again, since you went first before.
So what comes to my mind as you ask me that question, and I'm going to paraphrase here from Howard Schultz, who used to be the CEO of Starbucks. You can't expect employees to exceed customer expectations if the employee doesn't see management exceeding their expectations. And, as managers, we need to inspire, we need to give freedom to operate, we need to give that ability for the employee not to just be taking direction and tasks, but really embody creativity. That's where we're going to see value creation happening, right? And so that goes back to my opening statement is if functional managers can now stop kind of just, did you get this done? Did you get this done? When are you going to get this to me? Is what did we learn? How are we thinking about this? What do we feel is going to improve the experience for the customer? And I know we're always focused on the external customer. We also need to focus on the internal customer, because if we make our internal customers happier, our external customer will be happier as well. So I think that would be my advice is we just need to exceed our employees' expectations and how we manage by really inspiring them to think big and try things out without the fear of, hey, you messed up, right? Try it, learn from it, move forward.
Thank you.
I agree. I for me, if I were, someone listening for the functional leader, and I was thinking of it, Tarja, this functional leader has either someone on their team that's a core team or a core team member. And I would say for them to seek to understand, because not often do those functional leaders really understand the onus that's on that core team member. So to me, that's a critical element that I think would provide the support to that core team member. Understand the process, understand what that team member is going through, because then it's there that they can help enable and eliminate roadblocks. So to me, that is really, one key piece is really that functional leader understanding what it takes to be a core team member and providing that support to that team member.
Wonderful. Gary.
I think, Mehdi said earlier, functional managers and senior managers are, their primary role is to help enable success within their organization. And I totally agree with that. To drill down on that a little, what I would suggest is focus on the practices that are important to your organization that are not within an SOP. Okay, so I'm just talking about the practices. So for example, tolerance analysis in engineering or statistics, you probably have an SOP somewhere. Forget about that. But what's your practice for writing requirements? I talk to all sorts of clients about this, and they're all over the map. There's no best practice for developing requirements. In manufacturing, they're always talking about design for manufacturability. I asked them, well, what's your practice around that? And it's like, I don't know. So in every function, there are these core practices that will make them better. We use the term functional excellence. That's what functional excellence is about. So focus on developing those practices and capabilities, and then coaching the people on the teams on how to apply those. And I would say, and we talk about the delegation model, right? So we know that some people need a shorter leash or a longer leash, depending on their level of experience and maturity. But I would coach them to stay out of the projects, but stay in the projects through delegation and coaching of team members. You don't personally have to be in there. You need to be focused on creating better practices and somehow getting your team members to practice that.
Mm-hmm. And that confidence level and credibility of the team will continue to actually increase as a result of it. So that time coaching a team member really pays off. Kind of comes back to also what you were saying, Suzanne.
And I guess one other thing I'll add, because I've had this discussion with functional leaders before, and I think they're a little nervous of taking the hands off the wheel here, right? Because it's like you're teaching your kid how to drive, right? You're over there ready to grab the wheel. and it's scary because in a way they're losing a little bit of influence. But what I would say is if you're delegating and empowering in the right way, look at it as a way to actually increase your influence.
Exactly.
So you can only be in one place at a time, but if you have a dozen people in your organization all spreading the word and practicing your best practices, you've increased your influence in the organization greatly. And that's also a mind shift.
Well, that may be
I love
also
that.
how we shift minds, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so going
Yes.
back, kind of the summarizing this, we need to know where we headed, which gets us back to where's the mission and where's the vision, where's the strategy that gets us there. But then at the end of that, we really want to make sure that we bring the collective power of the organization together. And in big transformations where we start bringing in and really wanting to do a different level of empowerment, we need to really realize also that the social contracts are all changing, and they don't change by saying now this is what we're doing. They change in the intersection of two people, right? And so building time for social contracts and building time for relationship management becomes a very important part of what we do every day. And I would say that's a good way for us to end here, because leadership at the end is measured through actions. And that will always be true regardless of what level we are in. I really want to thank you for your time, your insight, and for the listeners out there, we will make sure that you will have some way of contacting everyone on this panel if you have some questions. Thank you so much, and I hope that we will talk again soon, because I can see that there is no silence in this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Leader's Agenda. You can continue the conversation with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter by following Action for Results.